On October 17, 1973, the world held its breath as Arab oil-producing countries declared a total embargo on oil exports to nations supporting Israel. This moment didn't emerge from a vacuum. It was the climax of a series of events stretching back over a decade. In the early 1960s, a revolution was brewing in the global oil market. The Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, known as OPEC, was born out of a desire for control. Originally founded by 5 countries, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, Kuwait, and Venezuela, OPEC sought to manage oil production and prices more effectively. By the late 1960s, it had significantly impacted the world economy, raising oil prices and boosting the incomes of its member states. Fast forward to October 6, 1973. Amid rising tensions, the Yom Kippur War erupted when Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack on Israel during one of its holiest days. This conflict, framed by deep historical grievances and territorial disputes, intensified not only military clashes, but also geopolitical tensions across the globe. The West, particularly the United States, stood firmly behind Israel, while many Arab nations rallied in support of the opposing forces. In the heat of this conflict, OPEC's Arab members met to deliberate their next moves. They were no longer just producers. They had transformed into powerful political players. On October 16, 1973, they took a decisive step. The members voted to cut oil production and impose an embargo against countries that supported Israel, primarily targeting the United States and several key European nations. It wasn't merely an act of economic aggression. It was a statement, a display of unity among Arab nations unwilling to let their resources be exploited while their brethren faced military defeat. The immediate effects were seismic. Oil prices skyrocketed, more than quadrupling in only a few months. European countries, heavily reliant on Middle Eastern oil, found themselves grappling with energy shortages. Gas lines formed and inflation soared, leading to widespread panic. The lights of Western Europe dimmed, quite literally, as the reality of overdependence on foreign oil sank in. Governments scrambled to respond. With each passing day, the crisis deepened. Citizens began to face harsh realities. Fuel rationing became the norm, and so did short work weeks. The social contract began to splinter under the pressure. In Britain, the infamous 3-day week was implemented as a desperate measure to conserve energy. In France and Germany, stockpiles dwindled, and the horizon of an energy crisis became clearer and more threatening. For many, the comfort of modern life faced a stark challenge. But beyond the immediate chaos was a historical pivot. European nations realized they could no longer ignore their vulnerability. Leaders who once dismissed the idea of investing in alternative energy sources were forced to reconsider. The seeds of change were planted, but the road ahead was fraught with contention. Betrayals were afoot as countries grappled with their alliances. Some turned to less amicable partnerships, while others looked inward, fueling the fires of nationalism and self-sufficiency. Yet as Europe sought to chart a new course, questions loomed large. Would the embargo hold? How would governments balance the needs of their citizens against the demands of foreign policy? The embers of unrest smoldered. As the crisis unfolded, citizens watched not just the price at the pump, but the political landscape itself shift beneath their feet. With the specter of fuel shortages looming, what drastic measures would European nations take to secure their energy future? And more crucially, who would be sacrificed on the altar of policy during this energy crisis that would redefine a continent? On October 17, 1973, the world plunged into chaos as the oil embargo took effect. The Arab oil-producing nations, united in their decision, hit pause on supply for countries backing Israel. Panic sparked across Western Europe. Oil prices skyrocketed, up to 400% in just a matter of months. Markets gasped. Germany, France, and the United Kingdom felt the heat immediately. Long lines formed at gas stations, sometimes spiraling for blocks. Some drivers resorted to jerry cans, desperate to fill their cars and their tanks. But the rationing began. Governments introduced strict limits on fuel purchases. By the end of 1973, a sense of urgency enveloped the continent. Inflation erupted alongside fuel shortages. Prices for everyday goods soared as transportation costs ballooned. Western European economies, already vulnerable, staggered like boxers in the first round of a bout they weren't prepared for. The consumer faces shifted from curious shoppers to anxious citizens. What would happen next? Countries scrambled to respond. They activated emergency plans to conserve energy. The British government launched a campaign urging citizens to carpool, conserve electricity, and even lower their thermostats. Turn down your heating, turn off your lights, they pleaded. It wasn't just a suggestion, it was a necessity for survival. France took a different approach. They called upon their nuclear ambitions. In the decades leading up to this crisis, France had been increasing its nuclear capabilities, investing heavily in atomic energy to reduce dependence on foreign oil. The 1973 crisis accelerated that push. Now, the need for nuclear power felt imperative. Meanwhile, politicians across the continent faced mounting pressure. Discontent brewed among the populace. Social unrest surged. The unfolding crisis sparked debates in parliament halls about energy independence. Leaders contended with the weight of history. Could Western Europe emerge from this chaos with a stronger stance than before? In the heart of the crisis, a shocking betrayal unfolded in the oil-rich Middle East. Some nations, under U.S. influence and pressure, turned against their OPEC allies and continued exports. This fracture would further complicate an already tenuous situation, testing alliances and trust in unexpected ways. As winter descended, the urgency reached a fever pitch. Citizens braced for bleak months ahead. Heating oil became a precious commodity. Many homes struggled to stay warm. The government's control over energy markets tightened, enforcing rationing that would linger long after the crisis. Discussion around energy diversification intensified. European leaders began to realize that their over-reliance on OPEC's oil had turned from a convenience into a vulnerability. Talks of wind, solar, and nuclear energy ramped up. Yet, questions remained uneasy. How far would Europe go to secure its energy future? As the crisis unfolded, the fabric of Western Europe began to shift. Old paradigms crumbled under stress. The political landscape was becoming feasible for change, but at what cost? With pain and potential intertwined, one question hung in the air. As Europe navigated this treacherous new world, could they build a new energy strategy that would ensure a future free of manipulation and crisis? The answers would come at a price, and the journey had only just begun. What would their next moves reveal about the true power of energy in a fractured world? The oil crisis of 1973 shattered the illusion of stability in Europe. It laid bare the continent's painful truth. Overdependence on imported oil was a ticking time bomb. Armed with this realization, European leaders scrambled to reassess their energy portfolios. The door to diversification swung wide open, and the urgency was palpable. Countries like France quickly launched initiatives to cut back on oil consumption. Public transportation systems received much-needed boosts in funding. Cities expanded bus and rail networks, while citizens embraced carpooling and cycling like never before. The European public, facing stark fuel shortages, became unwitting participants in the movement for energy conservation. Germany followed suit, implementing strict fuel efficiency regulations. Car manufacturers were pressured to focus on smaller, more fuel-efficient vehicles. The landscape of the automobile industry began to change as environmental concerns took center stage in political discourse, all catalyzed by the crisis. Brokered conversations in the halls of power morphed into demands for energy independence. Some countries even floated the idea of a unified European energy policy. Energy was no longer just a commodity, it was a matter of national security. No longer could nations afford to gamble their futures on a few oil-rich states in the Middle East. By 1974, the formation of the International Energy Agency, IEA, was born from this collective realization. Member countries aimed to promote energy security and reduce vulnerability to international oil shocks. One of the agency's core strategies was to coordinate responses to supply disruptions. Through collaboration, they sought not just to survive the storm, but to build an energy fortress for the future. But the repercussions didn't end there. As Europe dug its heels into the ground, tensions simmered beneath the surface. Nations faced a dilemma: how to balance energy independence with the realities of interdependence and competition. Behavior shifted on all fronts. Consumers, once complacent, suddenly became vigilant. They scrutinized the energy policies of their governments, demanding transparency and action. This new energy consciousness spread like wildfire across the continent. The crisis became a catalyst for change, sparking innovations in renewable technology. Still, the dark shadow of the oil crisis loomed. Some countries wrestled with two competing interests: their urgent need for energy security and their lingering reliance on oil imports. Political alliances began to fracture as nations put their interests above collective goals. Whispers of betrayal echoed in corridors of power. Would European nations succumb to the very dependencies they sought to escape? As tensions escalated, the question lingered: could unity triumph over self-interest as the continent grappled with its energy future? As the debate raged on, one thing became clear. The fallout from the 1973 oil crisis wasn't just a moment in history. It was a watershed moment that would shape Europe's energy policies for decades to come. What were the long-lasting impacts of these changes on everyday lives in Europe? And how did this crisis influence the global energy landscape at large? The answers lie just ahead. As the dust settled from the 1973 oil crisis, Western Europe found itself at a crossroads. The cartography of power had shifted dramatically. No longer could nations rely solely on imported oil without confronting the realities of vulnerability. Increased attention turned to political power dynamics. National governments, facing public outcry and economic strain, began to realign their strategies. Calls for a unified energy policy grew louder. Leaders across the continent recognized the necessity of collaborative action. It wasn't just an economic imperative, it was about sovereignty and security. France, under President Georges Pompidou, took a bold stance, pushing for a cohesive European energy strategy. He envisioned a Europe where countries could support one another in times of crisis, diminishing the chokehold that oil-rich nations held over their economies. Germany, once reliant on Middle Eastern oil, began to pivot. The crisis spurred the creation of the Federal Ministry for Research and Technology, focusing on innovative alternatives. By 1975, the German government committed millions to research into nuclear power and renewable energy sources. In the UK, similar patterns emerged. The Labour government introduced measures aimed at enhancing energy efficiency and promoting the use of coal, efforts that reverberated through public consciousness. This newfound urgency didn't just spark internal reforms. It ignited a competitive spirit among nations. Countries raced to secure alternative energy supply routes. Denmark emerged as a pioneer in wind energy, laying the groundwork for a revolution in renewable resources. Investment basked in newfound daylight. Money flowed into solar energy initiatives in southern Europe, and hydroelectric projects gained traction. Yet the road to diversification was not without obstacles. Tensions simmered beneath the surface. Nations like Italy relied heavily on oil imports, forcing its leaders to engage in difficult conversations about energy autonomy. The balancing act of fostering independence while grappling with economic realities challenged alliances and strained relationships at times. The fallout from the crisis also influenced global politics. European nations became increasingly wary of foreign oil production capabilities. Cartel politics and diplomacy became paramount. The Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, had thrown a wrench into global energy markets, demonstrating the power of coordinated action among oil-rich nations. Europe had to tread carefully, navigating a landscape marred by skepticism and self-interest. As investment in alternative energy peaked, the shadow of the crisis loomed large. Citizens, tired of fluctuating fuel prices, pushed back against their governments, demanding accountability. Strikes and protests erupted across Europe as workers marched for their rights, urging leaders to prioritize energy independence. Politicians found themselves caught in a web of promises, needing to deliver swift solutions to an increasingly restless populace. The legacy of the 1973 oil crisis proved transformative. It reshaped European energy policies, embedding the issues of sustainability and security deeply into the political narrative. The next few decades would see the establishment of substantial frameworks aimed at energy cooperation, including the eventual formation of the European Union's energy policy. But the real question loomed large. As Europe sought to redefine its energy future, would it truly break free from the chains of dependency? Or would geopolitical tensions force it into a precarious entanglement with the very nations it sought to outmaneuver. What developments awaited that would further test the continent's resolve?